It's the amazing Rico Bronya podcast with your host, Evan Roberts.
Well, a very happy post-Thanksgiving to you. Welcome to Rico Bronya, episode number 388. I had no idea we were up to 388 episodes. That's stupid. That's dumb. That means Hoff and I have no lives, and we Rico way too often. We're glad to be here. We're glad to be of service for you, and we welcome you to a very special week of Rico Bronya, what I like to call Trade Week. We did this a year ago. We bring it back for year two. Trade Week. We go through all the variety of trade ideas, just in case David Stearns downloaded the Rico Bronya, and he's like, all right, I'm going to the winter meetings next week. I'm very excited. It'll actually begin on December 8th. I need some trade ideas. So this entire week, along with other Met talk, we will be going through trade targets of position players. That's what we're going to focus on today. Trade targets of pitchers. We'll do that later this week. We'll even create a fictitious Met-Yankee trade idea podcast with WFAN's Chris McMonagle. And we will have an edition of the Rico in which we respond to your trade ideas. So as you're listening to this episode, or as you're bored at work, or as your wife or husband is trying to explain something to you that's very, very boring, you can jot down your very own Met trade ideas, and you can email us to ricob@gmail.com. You could tweet it at me, but I am very, very bad at checking my mentions. So maybe you can DM at Evan Roberts, WFAN. But surely the best way to interact with the pod is emailing us, thericob@gmail.com. So we will do a lot of different trade ideas over the next week here on Rico Bronya. One other thing I want you to think about, because I started thinking about this over the last couple of days. Every offseason, we have a very special Rico Bronya rewatch. We pick an old game in Met history. We assign it to everybody. We find it on YouTube, and we watch it. And then we do an entire episode in which we're recapping the game, responding to the game. Last year, we picked an awful loss, a loss that was in my lifetime. So it was something I was clearly rewatching, and that was Game 7 of the 2006 NLCS to the St. Louis Cardinals. A year before that, we did a rewatch for some of our older listeners, but a new watch for me, and that was Game 7 of the 1986 World Series. So as we get closer to the Christmas season, I do think the best time to rewatch a game is when you're bored as hell, maybe you had too much eggnog, and it's the Christmas season. So we will start to work on finding the game that we should rewatch during this offseason. I do raise my hand, and I tell you that maybe we should go back to picking a win. Last year, it was really, really depressing rewatching a loss. I was thinking about losses in Met history that are before my time, and maybe for a lot of our listeners, that would be unique and maybe not hurt as much because we're watching a Met loss that maybe our dads or moms told us about. But the problem is we got a lot of older Rico listeners, and then they're going to have to relive some kind of painful loss. So two games that jumped out at me that are before my time as a Met fan is the Mike Scioscia game in the 1988 NLCS. That was a crazy freaking game that I watched a little bit during the pandemic. But this time I would sit down, I would score it. It would be a complete rewatch. The Mike Scioscia game, 88 NLCS. And the other one, if you want to go back further, and it does exist on YouTube, is Game 7 of the 1973 World Series. So just a couple of ideas. If you have any thoughts, of course, interact with us, thericob@gmail.com, and we will make a decision in the next couple of weeks. 1 week from now is the winter meetings. I just mentioned that in the open. We will get action in the winter meetings. We'll get a lot of rumors in the winter meetings. And I do think that probably, I'm going to guess, before or the early part of the winter meetings, we're going to get closure on Juan Soto. And I think that's great for a myriad of reasons. Number one, selfishly, I think we as Met fans just want to know, are we going to get this guy? And then we can put together plan B. If we don't get Juan Soto, if we do get Juan Soto, we'll celebrate. We'll be obnoxious. There'll be a few Rico Bronyas in which all we're doing is smiling and laughing at Yankee fans. And then we'll analyze, what we expect from him over the next 15 years. If we don't get him, like I said, we got to talk about plan B. I do think we're going to get closure on this. So number one, it's good because we'll know, is he a Met or is he not a Met? And number two, the rumors that just circumvent the internet and social media is painful. And I've tried to avoid it. The problem is I'm in a Mets text chat. So every time somebody, I don't even know who the hell they are, tweets out, Juan Soto's done. He's a Red Sox. It's in my text message chain. So what I would tell my fellow Met fans who are obsessed with social media and obsessed with getting the latest on Juan Soto is I would give you this piece of warning. To me, there are really only two reporters. I'm going to go with three. There are three reporters that I really trust, that when they say something, I would listen. Number one, in this case, John Heyman, because John Heyman is a Scott Boras guy. And so since he's getting his information, you would think, from Scott Boras, there's a message with every story he has, whether it's trying to get Hal to bid more, whether it's trying to get Steve Cohen to bid more, or it's just breaking us the story. Considering how much John Heyman does for Scott Boras would be a real douche to not give the breaking news story to John Heyman. So John Heyman, I would trust. Obviously, you got to figure out why he's putting information out there, what the motivation is. But once you get past that, I think John Heyman has correct information. That's number one. Number two is Jeff Passan. I think Jeff Passan has proven to all of us he's the best baseball reporter out there. He will, in all likelihood, break this story, like he has so many, whether it's Jacob deGrom going to Texas or Francisco Lindor being acquired by the Mets. Jeff Passan is the preemptive. You know the word I mean. I'm tired. The Jets suck, and they're ruining my sports life. You know what I mean? The preemptive. Whatever, I'm giving up. He's the best.
Prolific.
That's not even what I meant, Pete.
No, it's not. I know.
Whatever. We all love Jeff Passan. And then the third guy, believe it or not, he's a really good reporter with the Yankees, and that's Jack Curry. Like, Jack Curry was pretty much breaking the Juan Soto trade to the Yankees a year ago. Now, his information will be more Yankee-centered, but considering this guy is a free agent Yankee, I think Jack Curry would have very good information. So take a deep breath. We all know nothing. We have no idea how this is going to play out, but I do think we're going to get an answer within the next week. I do want to warn you about one thing. In about a week and a half, I have to have a medical procedure. That said medical procedure, nothing major. I won't die, or at least hopefully not. I will be put under. And because I'll be put under, when I get woken up late that day, I'm going to be really drugged up. And so I'm not allowed to go on WFAN. I can't do my show that day. Tiki and Morash and Loogie will do a great job. But what I've been asking my wife is, I've been saying, honey, if I wake up from this anesthesia, whatever the hell they're doing to me, and Juan Soto has signed, you have to let me go upstairs and do the Rico and respond to it. So we've had a drunken Rico. We may have a Evan is really high Rico in about a week and a half. And honestly, Pete, even if Soto doesn't sign, that could just be a fun Rico anyway.
I think that's got to be a no-brainer no matter what. Like, just beg your wife. Like, no matter what happens, I'll call her and say, listen, he signed. We got to do this right now no matter what, just to mess around with you. And I'll try to join in the fun as much as possible. I'll eat a gummy. Let's go.
Yes, gummy it up, baby. So we'll keep you posted about that. Couple of things before we get to all the different trade targets. Today we're going to be focusing on position players. I noticed that the New York Mets announced the start time for opening day. And I only bring this up because it's unique and it's different. If they had announced 1:10, I probably wouldn't have said a word. But they're actually moving it up, or moving it back, I guess, to 3:10, which I have to admit I kind of like. Now, this has nothing to do with my own personal ability to go to opening day, because I'm screwed no matter what. I'm not going unless the Yankees happen to play at the same time, and we'll see if they do. They're going to be playing the Pirates home opener that day, so you never know. Maybe they'll be playing at 3 o'clock as well. I do not know. So I'm looking at this as an unbiased, this doesn't affect me opinion. I think on a Friday afternoon, it's very difficult to just get to a ballpark, not at 1 o'clock, but really at 12:15, because you want to be there for the ceremony. So I think on a Friday afternoon, we know how busy the city can be. I kind of like that they're pushing back the start time. I don't know if this is something that we'll see next year, if opening day is on a Monday or a Tuesday or a Wednesday or any other day but a Friday. But I do think that is a very good idea. You know, you can get to the ballpark early and, I guess, tailgate. But if you can't get to the ballpark early, it's okay, because you're talking about basically just leaving work a little bit early, as opposed to really having to take the day off. When a game's at 1:10, and you want to be there by 12:15, you're not working at all. So I think for those that go to opening day, for those that treat opening day like an event, I think it's a good announcement. I kind of like it. So 3:10 opening day, that's the home opener that the Mets are playing. Remember, the Mets open up on the road. They're opening up in Houston against the Astros, which is odd in itself. And then they're playing their home opener against the Blue Jays, which is also very, very weird. Interleague play at its finest. So, and also they announced other start times, and they're sticking with the 4 o'clocks on Saturday afternoon. For the most part, they have a couple of early season Saturday night games, but for the most part, they're kind of locking in on the 4 o'clock Saturday game. I go back and forth about it. I kind of like Saturday night games. You can do a bunch of crap with your family and then go to the game at night, but I think that's just where everybody is in their life. And, do you want to spend the Saturday night at Citi Field, or would you rather spend the Saturday at 4 o'clock at Citi Field? So that's one of the things I also noticed. And the 4th of July game, Mets against the Yankees, they're playing on Friday, July 4th at Citi Field. That's also going to be a 3:10 first pitch. So they're following kind of the lead of opening day by going 3:10 first pitch. One other thing, Tommy Edman signed an extension with the LA Dodgers. Screw him. Screw Tommy Edman. Look, he got 5 years, $74 million. I know he kicked our ass in the National League Championship Series. I don't necessarily view him as a 5-year, $74 million guy, but the Dodgers did Dodger business by getting some deferrals on that deal. So I did notice the Dodgers were able to lock up Tommy Edman on a 5-year, $74 million deal. Now, let's get to trade week. So here's how I did this. I went through every single team in Major League Baseball, some of which are attached by rumors, some of which is just me using my noggin on, hey, would this guy be available? And we talk about it aloud. So I am going to name guys, and we're going to go team by team on this. And for this podcast, it will be position players. We'll do pitchers in a couple of days. I'll name the guy. I'll tell you their contract status. And Pete, you tell me before we get into what it would cost to get the guy, would you be interested in said player? You with me?
I'm with you, my friend.
So let's start it off inside our division. Let's get a little funky. Let's start off in the National League East, and let's start off with the Philadelphia Phillies. And I know that sounds nuts. Evan, come on. The Phillies and the Mets are not making a trade. You are right. But I want to throw this out there because I have heard his name mentioned as a guy that the Phillies may try to dump. And there is a scenario where he makes sense for us. This guy has 2 years left on his deal. He's making a very reasonable $20 million a year. Next year, he will be playing baseball as a 33-year-old. So you'll be getting a 33-year-old and a 34-year-old over the next 2 years. And the fellow I'm referring to is Nick Castellanos. In the incredible unlikeliness that the Phillies and Mets would ever agree to a trade, would you have interest in Nick Castellanos and the final 2 years of his deal?
I don't hate it. I'm not opposed to it. He seems to be, I know he had struggles last year. It's weird. The past few seasons, if I'm correct, he's had like these weird months where he goes like hitless. He's just nothing, but then still has his big impact when needed. And he was going towards the playoffs. I think his bat really did pick up. I do like it. His defense is not fantastic, which is another thing that we've always talked about. We're looking for a defensive outfielder, if anything. But I'd be intrigued depending on who we have to give up.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those fictitious ones because the Phillies and Mets would never agree to a deal. It's funny. Castellanos has been a disappointment in Philadelphia. When you think about what he was in Cincinnati, Chicago, and even before that in Detroit, this is a double machine. This is a guy who would have an over 800 OPS. And you look at his 3 years in Philadelphia, taking away postseason successes and making diving catches in October that come out of nowhere. His offensive numbers have been, I would say, reasonably disappointing. I thought he had a solid year in 2023, but last year his home runs were down, his average was down, his OPS was down, his RBIs were down. I would take him too if I didn't have to give up much. It's interesting that the Phillies are thinking about trying to dump that contract, but I don't think that they would be convinced enough to do it with the Mets, nor do I think the Mets would give up any kind of substantial prospects. It would probably have to be a contract for contract deal. Like Starling Marte makes the same amount of money and he's got one fewer year left on his deal. So if you're really looking at cost savings and you're the Philadelphia Phillies, you could take back a right fielder in Starling Marte, who's probably, despite his bad defense last year, still a better defensive right fielder than Castellanos. Not as good offensively, even with Nick kind of underperforming the years in Philadelphia. And if you're the Phillies, you'd save $20 million because there's one fewer year on Marte's deal. But outside of a deal like that, I wouldn't have interest in giving much up. But Castellanos feels like a key member of that room, like that Philly personality that they've developed the last couple of years. So it's fascinating that they would make him available. I'd be interested too, but I would do it for basically nothing. And that's one of those deals that will never happen because the Phillies and the New York Mets now hate each other. If this was a few years ago, they may make a deal. As you recall, they did make a Rico Bronya trade many years ago, but the Nick Castellanos trade would not go down. Don't roll your eyes. The name of the freaking podcast is Rico Bronya.
I understand, but that was what, 30 years ago? I mean, that's the last. Is that the last time they made a trade together?
Nah, no. They've definitely made smaller deals since then. All right, let's stay inside the National League East with a team that would make a trade with the New York Mets. Like, no joke. If the Mets called them up, they would deal, mainly because they've dealt a lot over the years, and that's the Miami Marlins. Now, in a few days when we talk about pitchers, Jesus Luzardo will be a big name we talk about. But when it comes to position players, I'm going to give you a guy that's very interesting because he doesn't make money. So this guy would be very, very cheap, and he would be a replacement for Pete Alonso, just not very good. And that is Jake Burger. Jake Burger had 29 home runs last year. He had 34 home runs in 2023. He isn't due for arbitration until 2026. So that means this year he's still pre-arb. So he's not going to make a lot of money. The Marlins would still deal him. It wouldn't be a money thing. It would be a, hey, we're rebuilding, and he's 29 years old, and he's probably not a part of our future once we turn things around. Burger can play third base. He can play first base. Also, he doesn't necessarily have to be a replacement for Pete Alonso. He could just be a right-handed option at DH. Any interest in Jake Burger if the Marlins made him available?
Not really. I know that he's got a little pop in the bat, but it's not enough. It's too inconsistent. And I just don't think, like, we talk about fielding. We talked about Castellanos. Maybe, his defense isn't as good as Marte's, even though whatever. Burger, I don't think is an upgrade.
He's terrible defensively.
I know first and third base he could play, but that doesn't mean I want him there.
Yeah, he's bad defensively. He strikes out an awful lot. He doesn't walk a lot. The one positive he has is he gives you pop. He can hit home runs. I mean, the guy's hit, 33 home runs 2 years ago. I mentioned the pop he had last year. I think the Marlins would deal him, but they would probably want solid prospects back. I would not be interested in trading much for Jake Burger, and I certainly wouldn't view him as a Pete Alonso replacement. I would view him as just, a bat off the bench or a guy that can DH half the time. But he could be available, that's for sure. The Marlins are open for business on anybody. That's it in the National League East. There's really nobody in Washington that jumped out at me, and there's really nobody in Atlanta that they would even consider trading other than Jared Kelenic. Like, I thought about Jared Kelenic a little bit, but that's just too weird. I don't want to go down that road. Plus, he sucks. How about that? How about the fact he's not any good?
Well, he was good last year for a little bit. Like, he had his moments, but the one thing that we don't want to do is take like a flash that he had, trade pieces to get him back, and him really suck for us. That would be the worst.
Let's go to the National League Central. I was looking at the Chicago Cubs. They've got two really intriguing bats that could be available. One, I'm sure, is. The other, we'd have to pry away. Let's start off with the more unrealistic Ian Happ. Ian Happ is 30. He'll be 31 in August. He's got 2 years left on his deal. He's making $21 million this upcoming year. He's making $19 million the year after that. He is a really good defensive outfielder. So you bring him in, you're bringing yourself a Gold Glove winner. The guy's won 3 Gold Gloves, including 3 in a row in the outfield in Chicago. He plays every day. Played 158 games 3 years ago, 158 games 2 years ago, 153 games last year. And he's very consistent. Like, his numbers are always kind of in that same range. He'll hit somewhere between 17 to 25 home runs. He'll drive in about 80 runs. He'll hit about 245, 250. He'll have an OPS in the high 7s. He also walks at a really high pace. So even though he strikes out a lot, He walks about 12% of the time. The major league average is 8% of the time. I don't think Chicago's motivated to deal him. I think they would want good prospects back. He's on I would say a reasonable contract with what I described, 2 years, $39 million left. He's a switch hitter. Yes, I'd want Ian Happ. I think he'd be a wonderful addition to the outfield. I think the only negative is you're probably forced to shift Brandon Nimmo to center. So you degrade yourself a little bit defensively in center, but you give yourself a Gold Glove left fielder in Ian Happ. Your interest level?
It's mild. I don't mind him. Again, he did used to play the infield too. Not saying that that's where they're going to use him, but I like the fact that there's versatility there, just in case of an emergency. Not saying that we're going to have that because we have so many young prospects up. They're going to be stuffed at second base all season long. But I just don't think it's valuable to go above and beyond to bring Hap at left field and then move Nimmo to center field. I think that's you're hurting the team. I need upgrades, dude.
You're upgrading yourself defensively in left field because I think Ian Happ's a better defensive left fielder than Brandon Nimmo, but you're hurting yourself in center. I mean, you could move Brandon Nimmo to right. That is a possibility. He does not have that typical right fielder's arm because Brandon Nimmo's got no arm, essentially. Right. So if they miss out on Juan Soto, and that's, of course, a big part of this, it's why it's so challenging to kind of analyze an offseason. That's why nothing's happening, because we're all waiting on if they add Juan Soto or not. But if they don't add Juan Soto, look at them at outfield. They got a lot of freaking questions, because one thing I know for certain is I don't want Starling Marte as the everyday right fielder. He's either being traded and could be in one of these deals we're talking about with only 1 year left on his deal, maybe a contract for contract trade, or he's DHing. So I think you have to kind of think about it that way. You get Ian Happ as your left fielder. What do you do with Nimmo? Is he in center? Is he in right? The other guy is Cody Bellinger, and that is a name we've heard a lot because after Bellinger opted in on the final 2 years of his deal, the Chicago Cubs are looking to move him. Here's where we stand on Bellinger's age and salary, and then we'll talk about if he's worth it. He's 29 years old, so still relatively young. We always talk about this when we went through the free agent position players. Soto's in his 20s. Everybody else is old. Everybody else is in their 30s. Bellinger will turn 30 in July. He's due to make $27.5 million this year, and then he would make $25 million in 2026. So you're talking about 2 years, about $52.5 million left on his deal. Last year for Chicago, Cody Bellinger went out, played 130 games, hit .266, 18 home runs, 78 RBIs with a 751 OPS. So he wasn't the dog, and I mean bad dog that he was in LA his final year with the Dodgers, in which he was basically unplayable. But he was also not nearly as good as what he was in Chicago in 2023. That got him back into free agency with what we perceive to be a lot of value. He was somewhere in the middle. Wasn't as bad as 22, wasn't as good as 23. His speed or his stolen base numbers were way down. Remember, he stole 20 bases with the Cubs in 23. It was down to 9 last year. What do you make of Cody Bellinger, especially with the money he's due over the next 2 years?
His last 4 years, really what I'm looking at, 73 home runs, a 724 OPS. He's played, 499 games. He doesn't play every single day anymore. Like the one time he did it was in 2018. He's at, 130, 144 the last 3 seasons. I think he's lost something. I really don't know where he's at, and I don't want to have a risk like that. I don't want to trade for him. I really don't.
I would trade for him in the circumstances of losing Pete Alonso, which I don't want to do. I would trade for him if I'm not giving much up, like if I'm just moving a contract, like a Starling Marte and a marginal prospect. Because what Bellinger does give me that I like, there are 2 things I like about Cody, 3 things I like about Cody Bellinger. Number 1, his strikeout numbers are way down. Like last year, he had the lowest strikeout percentage of his major league career. He's not the strikeout artist he was during his MVP years. So even though he's not nearly as productive as he used to be, he's not the walking strikeout he used to be. So I think that's at least one minor positive sign. Number 2, the versatility. The idea that he could be my first baseman, he could be my center fielder. And oh, by the way, he's very good defensively at both. And that's the third part, that he's good defensively. So even if I get kind of the mild stats I got from him last year with the Cubs, the numbers I just kind of went through, they wouldn't be the worst in the world. What I can't have happen is have him be the unplayable mess he was in 22 in his last year with the Dodgers. As long as he puts up, the 265, the 20 home runs, the strikeout numbers are way down, and he can give me really good defense at either first base or center field, he's a backup option. I want to make that clear. He's not my first option in this offseason. And I would also do it without giving up key prospects. I would almost go to the Cubs and say, I'm absorbing that contract. I'm doing you a favor because he opted in on the last 2 years of his deal. And that's kind of my thought with him. Backup plan, but those positives could at least draw me into why he would be my backup plan.
I feel like you're trying to force it, like, this could work. So we'll backup plan just in case everything falls through. Cody Bellinger's our guy.
But Pete, remember this, and this is kind of the exercise here. When you think about position players, they're all backup plans because the first plan, to me, is Juan Soto, and then it's Pete Alonso, and to many listening, maybe it's Willie Adames or Alex Bregman. Those are the plan A's and the plan B's. Everybody, and you'll hear it, we'll go up and down this list. Every single person we mention are backup plans, and some you may like more than others, but clearly this offseason can be had without making any kind of trade for a position player.
Right.
Keep that in mind. All right, let's get to the Brewers have pitchers we'll get to. The Cardinals have one position player. I'm going to give you the facts, and I'll tell you why I have no interest, and that's Nolan Arenado. Nolan Arenado will be 34 in early April. He still has 3 years left on his deal. A lot of this money is not that bad because the Rockies are paying a lot of it. So the research I had is that he's only due to make from St. Louis $21 million in 2025, $16 million in 2026, and $15 million in 2027. And then he's got a ton of deferred money. I don't think that's the problem of the team that acquires him, if I'm not mistaken. I think that's still kind of on whoever gave him the deferred money, which I think is the Colorado Rockies. I'm not sure if the Cardinals kind of picked up on that. So the money's not bad on Arenado. Like, you hear that owed over the next 3 years, and it's not the worst. I just think he's on a rapid decline. I really do. And obviously getting Arenado, again, would be a backup plan. They lose Pete Alonso. I would keep Nolan Arenado at third base. I know he says he's willing to move to first base. That would not interest me. I still think he can play third base at a high level, and you'd be moving Mark Vientos to first base. I don't think he has a lot left. That's kind of my big hesitation on Nolan Arenado. I think if I lose Pete Alonso, I'm going to look for something that's more sustainable over the next few years than, a 34-year-old Band-Aid in Nolan Arenado. I was hot for him 3 years ago. The Mets made the decision to go after Lindor instead. That has turned out to be a great decision, by the way. If you look at what Arenado did since that trade and what Lindor has done since our trade, I have no interest in Nolan Arenado. How about you?
No, none whatsoever. I think you said it, but if you didn't, I think his OPS is the lowest it's been since his rookie year, 719. He can't hit the way he once did. The power is gone. I don't know if he's going to be able to pull the ball in Citi Field. I really don't know what he's going to do. And then defensively, I know, like you said, he moved to first base. I think it's too late in his career to successfully move to first base and us be like, oh, this is an upgrade. It's not worth it. And third base, not for nothing, he had a dead arm a couple of years ago. I'm concerned about that. I just don't think he's healthy anymore.
Yeah, I have no interest. Nolan Arenado is not someone that interests me. In Cincinnati, Jeimer Candelario, the third baseman, the switch-hitting third baseman, may remember him with the Washington Nationals. He has 1 year left on his deal, making $15 million. Here's the deal. If the Mets backup plan is acquiring Candelario and moving Mark Vientos to first base, we will have just had the most depressing offseason of all time. I mean, no, thank you. Like, Jeimer Candelario, I would take as a bench player, but you're not paying $15 million a year to a bench player. So I assume you agree with me. No gracias on Candelario.
Yeah, no, none whatsoever. My one question was, would you have been interested in India? Because that was like the one guy I think I always had maybe an eye on.
Not really, because I look at Jonathan India and I say to myself, okay, is he my second baseman? Like I view second base as something that's going to be filled. Maybe not right away, but certainly by the end of the year, my hope, and over the next few years, by one of Luis Angel Acuna, who's tearing up winter ball, by the way, Jet Williams, like one of those two guys, I think is going to take that job, and they're both very, very close. So if I trade for Jonathan India, who's young, he's 28 years old, is in the prime of his career, I'm making him my second baseman. And quite frankly, I don't think he was that good after his rookie year. Like, he had a great rookie year. He's had 3 years in a row in which he hasn't come anywhere close to matching it. So, no, I wouldn't have had that much interest in Jonathan India. Maybe I'm a tough grader.
No, well, I have no interest in Candelario. So there we go. Cincinnati Reds.
There you go. Now, the Arizona Diamondbacks could be a very intriguing trade partner when we get to the pitching episode of the Rico. Jordan Montgomery will be a name we bring up. But another guy who had a very good year last year is Eugenio Suarez. He had 30 home runs, which he's done a lot. Do you know that he's had 5 30-plus home run seasons in his major league career? 5? It's damn impressive. He's at 276 career home runs. Hit 30 last year, drove in over 100 runs, had a 788 OPS. And even though it feels like he's been around forever, he's 33 years old, and he's reasonable. He's only got 1 year left on his deal, making $15 million. Again, a backup plan if they lose Pete Alonso, or you could bring him in as a right-handed DH who can also play third base, give you versatility. How about Eugenio Suarez on a 1-year deal if you get him from Arizona?
He last year, I'm trying to look at his splits right now because he was so bad the first half of the season, but then basically carried Arizona kind of the same way that Lindor did for the Mets that second half.
Yeah, in the second half of the year, he hit 20 home runs with a 942 OPS. He was unbelievable during that Diamondback stretch where they looked unbeatable for a while.
Yeah, I'm interested. I'm definitely intrigued, and I think you kind of nailed it. I'd almost be more into a DH, but can spell third base. Did he ever play first base for a little bit too, or no? He never had that.
I'd have to look how often he's actually done that. I don't think he's done it a lot, but
because the one thing I feel like nowadays you want to have guys that are versatile. So if you can have a DH that can play third base, play first base, not give Pete Alonso a day off per se, but give him a rest from first base, or like I said, Vientos rest at third base. I'm open to that. I'm all about that, and I think Suarez would be awesome.
Yeah, so Suarez has played 0 games at first base, but I remember this in fantasy. It's the only reason why it popped into my head. I think I drafted him early because of this. They moved him to shortstop in 2021. And so when I saw that the Reds were doing that, I drafted him like way too high because I wanted the shortstop eligibility. But outside of that run playing shortstop, that's really it. He's a third baseman. So if you bring him in, it's third base DH.
But listen, if you could, not saying he was good at shortstop, but if he can play shortstop, he should be able to play anywhere on the diamond. No.
Yeah, but honestly, with this team, assuming Francisco Lindor is healthy, we're never going to be asking him to play.
No,
shortstop.
Of course not.
I'm going to throw a name at you, and I think this guy is available in the right deal. He's a bigger name than maybe you expect to be available, but he's also very, people will either jump and say, you got to get this guy, that's awesome, or they're going to say, come on, you guys are too old school looking at batting average. He actually sucks. And the guy I'm talking about is Luis Arraez. Luis Arraez, the man who's won 2 batting titles, 3 batting titles. That's right. He's actually won 3 consecutive batting titles with 3 different teams. It could be 4 for 4, baby. Actually, wait, he didn't win it last year in 2020. Yeah, he did. He won it last year. He won it in 2024. 22 with the Twins, 23 with the Marlins, 23 with the Padres. So here's the deal with Luis Arraez. He's got 1 year left on his deal. He's eligible for arbitration. Figure he's going to make $14 million a year, and then he's a free agent. He hit 318 last year, but it's literally the only thing he does. He does not hit for power. He does not have speed. He never strikes out. His strikeout numbers are ridiculous. He also never walks. He can play second base. I just mentioned how I want to have second base kind of available for one of my younger players. Well, that's okay because Luis Arraez also plays first base. In fact, last year with the Padres, he started 61 games at first base. If you go back a couple of years in Minnesota, he played a handful of games at third base, and he also played the outfield. We were not watching him every day in Minnesota. I can't tell you he's a good defensive outfielder. I can't tell you he's a good defensive third baseman, but we know he's done all of that. So if you bring him in, he doesn't have to be the second baseman. He can be the second baseman sometimes. He can be the second baseman until a Jet Williams or Luis Angel Acuna proves they're ready to be the everyday second baseman, and then Arraez could potentially play first, could potentially play third, could potentially play left field, could potentially be the DH. Here's what he is, in my opinion. He is a better version and a younger version of Jeff McNeil. Now, he doesn't hit for as much pop as Jeff McNeil, right? I definitely give Jeff that. Jeff has shown you he can hit 20 home runs in a season, but he's younger. He's a little bit cheaper because he only has 1 year left on his deal. But when you think about the potential to move around the diamond, I would say he's just a better version of Jeff McNeil. Jeff McNeil's won one batting title. Luis Arraez has won 3. Your thoughts on the potential availability of Luis Arraez?
There's got to be a reason why he's been on 3 teams in 3 years. No?
Yes, the reason is he's a one-trick pony. He's a singles hitter. He hits for a very high average and does nothing else. He doesn't hit for pop. He doesn't run. He never walks. So his OPS is pedestrian at best, but he'll go out and hit 320. That's
so
why.
I mean, again, back-to-back years of 200 hits. I mean, that's pretty fantastic. I guess I'd be interested, but let me put it this way. Priority list. I can't. I'm such a batting average whore. I am very much interested in him. I am, but I will not put him as a priority. Like, he's got to be like the 4th, 5th, or 6th move that we make, not the 1st or 2nd. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think all of these are backup plans to what to me is Soto and Pete Alonso. I think if they got Soto and Pete Alonso, I'd be pretty much done, and I'd be willing to say this is my core. Like, there's not much else I'm going to do. I'm going to re-sign a Jose Iglesias. I'm going to maybe get one more bench piece, but for the most part, I'd call it a day. I think Arraez is a backup plan. It changes. If you're essentially replacing Pete Alonso with Luis Arraez, you are just changing the entire complexion of this lineup. That's what you're doing. I don't even know where I'd hit him. He's not a high on base guy. He just gets a lot of hits.
Ooh, could I go? 9th.
Yeah. What about Brandon Nimmo? I thought Brandon Nimmo was batting 9th.
Well, it could be 8th guy. Be back-to-back leadoff guys.
Here's a guy that may be better than a backup plan if he is available. The Colorado Rockies are a very strange organization, so you never know. This guy's going to turn 30 next week, so this will be his age 30 season. He's got 3 years, $44 million remaining on his contract, which is a great deal. That's basically $15 million a year. The guy I'm talking about last year played, he played 153 games, hit 242 with a 722 OPS, 20 home runs, 65 RBIs, not amazing numbers. The year before that, played 152 games, 23 home runs, 753 OPS. The year before that, played 153 games, 20 home runs, 67 RBIs, 740 OPS. And the year before that, played 151 games. So the guy plays 150 games every year. Hits about 20 home runs, hits about 250, has a mid-700 OPS. And I should point out, is a very good defensive third baseman and can also play first base. The guy I'm talking about is Ryan McMahon. They're not the greatest numbers in the world, but he plays every day. He gives you some versatility. He's solid defensively. He doesn't make a lot of money. I think he's a little bit better than some of the other options we've talked about when you talk about age, when you talk about amount of money, contract status, defense, versatility. I'm not saying he's an all-star. And again, not better than the Alonso Soto plan, but I think is higher up than some of these other backup plans. Ryan McMahon Your thoughts?
So his splits, and I'm not even just talking about his home or away splits. OPS is about the same. I think he's actually had more power away. So I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about his first half to second half splits. The trade rumors hit as soon as he didn't get traded.
Yep.
He batted under 200. He was atrocious. He was Yankee fans, if they would have gotten that Ryan McMahon at the deadline, which I know tons of people were begging for him, they would have thrown Brian Cashman out the window. So I personally speaking watched him tightly. I know this is what he does. His numbers end up the same every year, but if the second half you're going to be that bad, I can't have you. I need you more. I need you more throughout the whole season. I can't have you go on these bad streaks.
You think it was related to the trade rumors, or was it just? I mean, maybe he was hurt and we didn't know about it, something of that nature.
Well, I do think that guys that are looking to get traded or potentially going to get traded and then don't go anywhere and then are on a team that's going nowhere, they kind of get lackadaisical. It just kind of happens. It's baseball. Baseball is boring at times. It's true.
All right, so not that high on Ryan McMahon.
No chance.
All right, let's go to the American League. This guy is coming off of 2 very concerning years in a row. 2 bad years in a row. This is his contract year. He is a free agent at the end of this season. Is 2 years removed from what was an all-star year. I don't want to say an MVP caliber year, but a damn good year, a 30-30 year. And I'm talking about Orioles center fielder Cedric Mullins. 2 years ago in 2021. So I guess that was 3 years ago now. Damn, that's crazy. He hit 291. He hit 30 home runs. He had 30 stolen bases. He had an 878 OPS. He followed that up with a year that wasn't bad, but not nearly as good as the previous year. He hit 258, 721 OPS, 16 home runs, 34 stolen bases. And then last year, played 116 games, or 2023, so 2 years ago, hit 233 with a 721 OPS. And then last year it got worse. He hit 234 with a 710 OPS, 18 home runs, 54 RBIs. He did steal 32 bases. His defense is solid. He's a center fielder. Think about what the Mets' options are in center field. I'm intrigued by Cedric Mullins. And I know all those numbers would depress you and make you say, well, why would you be intrigued with him? I'll tell you why. Number one, his value is not that high. The Orioles cannot ask for the moon in trading Cedric Mullins. That's number one. Number two, I get him a contract year. I get him in a year in which maybe, fingers crossed, he gives you more of a replication of 2021 than the last couple of years. Number three, the Mets are bridging themselves to hopefully Drew Gilbert or Jet Williams or Luis Angel Acuna. We've talked about these names a lot in relation to second base, but I've also mentioned center field's another one of those options. Right now, their bridge candidates, until one of those 3 guys takes the job, is Tyrone Taylor and Jose Siri. Cedric Mullins is not like a solid addition to that mix. Not long-term. I'm not talking long-term. I'm talking about, can I get a career year out of him? Can I bridge until one of my younger players are ready? He's also a left-handed bat. The 2 other guys I'm talking about in Siri or Taylor are right-handed bats. Obviously, the price tag matters. I don't want to give up a lot. Orioles are trying to win too, so I'd be curious, well, what's a fair matchup for Cedric Mullins for Tyrone Taylor? But I would be intrigued by him on hey, maybe I can get a big year out of him going into free agency. And they could use a center fielder because right now their plan is Taylor and Siri until one of the young guys are ready.
So I don't believe Taylor is as good at center field or Siri's as good at center field as Mullins is. So defensively, I'll give the edge to Mullins. I don't know his range as well, but I think he's a good defender. You talk about the offense, like he had maybe 100 more plate appearances or at-bats compared to Taylor, and he put up 10 more home runs than him. Like the OPS was the same, batting average a little bit lower, but the point is, like Mullins is more of a complete player. You think that he could have that extra pop to it. So I'm not opposed to bringing in somebody that's got good defense and has a little more offensive ability than Tyrone Taylor or Siri. Siri's somebody that's weird because I think he can have a really decent season. I just don't know what you're going to get.
It's also a weird platoon having two right-handed batters like that. So it'd be good to add a lefty to the mix, and I think Cedric Mullins would fit. But again, price tag matters. What is the cost? What are the Orioles going to look for? Another backup option at first base. We move over to the Tampa Bay area and look at 33-year-old Yandy Diaz. Yandy Diaz is making no money, which is, I guess, appealing. He's due to make $10 million in 2025 and $12 million on a team option in 2026. He's old, though. He's 33 years old, and the year he had last year was very blah as compared to what he did in 2023 when he finished sixth in the MVP voting and won the American League batting title when he hit 330 with 22 home runs. So what I fear is that last year's Yandy Diaz is probably more to what he actually is, and that 2023 was just a career year. He's never going to hit 330 again. Now, will he hit 22 home runs again? Maybe. I mean, that's the only time he ever hit over 20 home runs. Yandy is a complete backup plan, much like I've talked about with, Jake Berger and everybody else. Defensively, I'm not sure. I gotta have to watch him. I don't know how good he is defensively, but Yandy Diaz, to me, doesn't move the needle as a backup plan. It's just very, okay, I guess.
We already made our one move with the Tampa Bay Rays. I don't want to risk another one because who knows who they're going to steal from us.
Yes, stop being scared of the Tampa Bay Rays.
I am. I know. Listen, I know they haven't been as successful the past few years, but you just never know when they're going to screw somebody.
All right, how about this one? This guy, I think, is available because the Cleveland Guardians are a small market franchise. That's the way they are. It's the way they act. This guy is a free agent at the end of 2025. We are talking about left-hand hitting first baseman Josh Naylor, 27 years old. He'll be 28 in the middle of June. I don't know about you guys watching the Yankee Guardian series, and the Yankee Guardian series is over the last few years. I can't stand Josh Naylor. I can't stand looking at him. I can't stand the way he runs. I can't stand the way he looks, which is just mean. I guess I'm a mean guy. He did hit 30 home runs last year. He's driving 100 runs. He's been decent, I'd say, the last 2 years, but the 31 home runs, I don't know if I can rely on that because a year earlier in 2023, he only hit 17. Granted, it was in 121 games, but even those extra 30 games he played last year does not add up to hitting 31 home runs. The year before that, he had 20 home runs in 122 games. He's relatively young. So I guess that's the part that would intrigue me. He's a left-handed bat. He's got a little bit of cockiness to him. I think the problem is, I think the Guardians are going to ask for a lot. I don't think you're getting Josh Naylor on the cheap. And if I'm going into this bag to find a first baseman, I'd rather get someone that's not going to cost me nearly as much. Your thoughts on Josh Naylor?
It's weird because you're right. I do hate him. But I know that if we... But I know that if he was on the Mets, we'd freaking love him. That's the thing. And he's got that swag to him. The only problem is I do see him, BT and Sal ripping him. They're like, oh, he's so fat. He's so out of shape, this, that, the other thing. He could turn into a Bo Vaughn-esque type of trade, which would be terrible because we don't need that. But he does have that personality that if done right, he could add to the OMG, universe. Let's put it that way.
I think he's going to fit the locker room well, is what you're saying.
Oh, no questions asked. And I will tell you this much. I think he's got some balls on him too. They're not taking crap. Like if there's someone's getting beamed, he might go out and take somebody's head off.
Yeah, just about the fatness or the out of shapeness. He's a free agent at the end of the year. So you're not marrying him. You're not bringing him in and giving him a 7-year contract. This would be another one of those guys that you bring in a contract year and hope he has a big year and hope that that's what he does in a contract season. So you're not marrying him. You're looking at him on a short-term deal. The guy I've mentioned a lot, and every time I bring him up, I'll get 1 or 2 hate emails saying, Evan, why do you love this guy? There's no S at the end of his name, so I don't get the obsession. And that, of course, is Luis Robert Jr. of the Chicago White Sox, who's clearly available and may well be a part of a future Garrett Crochet trade, and we'll get into Garrett Crochet when we do the pitching portion of the trade week. But here are the things that intrigue me about Luis Robert Jr. I'll be perfectly honest. It's the potential. And it's the potential that we've already seen from him, even so briefly. The other thing is you are getting him long-term. Unlike a lot of the other guys we mentioned, Robert Jr. has already signed a long-term contract. He's actually under team control through 2027, which means when you bring him in, if you bring him in, you have him for the next 3 years, and he's basically not making any money. And he's still young. He's 26 years old. He's actually 27. He turned 27 in August, so this will be his 27 into 28 years. So you're going to have him at 27, 28, and 29 before he's a free agent. Last year with the White Sox, he was terrible. There's no defending that. I'm not going to sit here and defend it. I'll give you his numbers in case you're curious. He had 224. He played 100 games, 14 home runs, 657 OPS. But in 2023, he was an all-star. In 2023, he hit 38 home runs in 145 games. He stole 20 bases. He had an 857 OPS. I think he plays a decent center field again. Got to watch a guy every day to see it. He just doesn't stay healthy. That's his biggest issue. And I am convinced that if you bring a talent like Robert Jr. into a good locker room, into a good market, and dare I say, onto a good team, he's played on crap. You know, early in his career, the White Sox had a lot of promise, and he played some postseason baseball. But he's been on some of the worst teams ever the last couple of years. And if you care, maybe you don't, when Luis Robert Jr. did experience the postseason in 2020 and in 2021, he hit. He was very successful in the limited amount of time he played. It's a small thing, but I think he's one of those guys that if you bring to New York and you put him in a good environment and you have good veterans around him, I think there's a really good chance we see the guy who played like an all-star in 2023 and not the guy who was a dog last year. I am very interested in Luis Robert Jr.
I'm torn because I was very interested going into last year, and this year turned me off so much. Now, I saw some quotes that he said this year was terrible, and he puts it on himself. So I guess that's good. I guess it's taking ownership. But I don't know, man. Like, something about him, was he disinterested? I mean, I understand injuries were part of the problem, but they weren't good at all. The whole team felt like they were just blah. And I think that he being a leader didn't help get them out of that funk. That's part of it. Not saying that he has to be the leader of a team. We've seen Pete Alonso. He's a leader, but he's not a leader that we see Francisco Lindor be a leader. Something about Luis Robert Jr., I'm just more concerned now than I was. Last year going into the season, I would have said, hell yeah. This year, I'm debating it. Let's put it that way.
One of his teammates is Andrew Vaughn. Andrew Vaughn more as a bench piece. So he has 2 more years of team control, right-handed bat, little bit of pop. Minnesota Twins have a guy who I think they would trade if someone took on the remainder of his contract, and it's not even that much money per year. It's the fact that the guy's never healthy. Byron Buxton. Byron Buxton is signed in 2025, making $15 million. He signed in 2026, making $15 million. He signed in 2027, making $15 million. And he's under control in 2028, making $15 million. Byron Buxton has been a guy who for the last few years you watch and you wonder, what could he be if he ever stayed healthy? Now he's 31 years old and literally has never been healthy. Byron Buxton has had 1 year in his entire major league career, which dates back to 2015, where he's played more than 103 games. And that was back in 2017. Even last year was actually a healthy year for him. He played 102 games. And when he was out there, he was good. They made him a DH. So the idea of him coming over and being the center fielder, which is something I had thought about a couple of years ago, I think you have to throw it out the window, man. Like, he played center field last year, but can he play the outfield? Like, is that really something he can still do and stay healthy? Probably not. So if this was 2 years ago, maybe even last year on the Rico, we said trade for Byron Buxton. I probably did, actually, if you go back into the archives. But, dude, it's just another year where he doesn't stay healthy. So what can you do?
Yeah, I want no part of him. You know what he is? If he would have been healthy or his career, it's Aaron Hicks 2.0. Like, I mean, that's what it is.
He's better than that when he plays. That's the thing, though. When he plays, he's actually productive. He just doesn't play a lot.
Well, I see that, but again, he's still. If you average out his career to 162 games, I mean, yeah, the numbers are okay. I don't even understand how he was a MVP candidate in 2017. Said it was the 18th place, 16 home runs, 51 RBIs, the OPS is 728. I mean, what that was his defense that good that that got him in the MVP candidate?
Yeah,
I mean,
he used to be brilliant defensively. I mean, does he still have it? I don't know because he's barely out there.
I wouldn't trust it. Now, here is somebody that I keep on hearing, and I don't know why. Somebody started this, and it's probably a fake rumor. Carlos Correa?
Yeah, I don't think that's a fake rumor. I think they would want to move the contract. It's a massive, massive deal. We went through this last year, and I think when Minnesota signed him, we looked at it and said, boy, if you really do have concerns about, I even forgot what the injury was, a foot, an ankle? I think it was a foot. Can you really give him that kind of deal? Would you revisit that, though? Like, if the Mets miss out on bringing back Pete Alonso and, Alex Bregman is out there, and Alex Bregman is basically the same age as Carlos Correa. Correa is 30 years old, and he signed till 2032. So think about it. If you look at the remainder of his deal, it's 5 years, $180 million, I think, essentially. That's probably what Bregman's going to get. Would you prefer Carlos Correa over Alex Bregman and just move him to third base like originally planned?
He did have a good season last year.
He missed half the season, though. That was not that it was connected to the concerns we had. He played 86 games. He didn't play the whole season.
I know, but he played much better than, like, let's put it this way. Remember when Javi Baez was here and Javi Baez, oh my goodness, should we keep him? And thank God we avoided that debacle. I think that Carlos Correa, I think it's done. I think we've moved on and I'm okay with it. I'm not hurt anymore by him, not taking that contract.
I mean, so two things happened since we went over the Correa thing. Okay, two things happened. It's been 2 years now, not 1 year. It was 2 years ago that this whole thing went down. Number one, in 2023, he was awful. He was abysmal. He would have fit right in on our team because he was horrible, right? So that happened. Then last year, yeah, you're right, he was great. He missed half the season. So in the 2 years since the Mets pursued him, he had a god-awful season that would have caused us to be booing him by May 1st. And then he followed it up by missing half the season. So I'll answer the question I posed to you. I prefer Alex Bregman. Like, if you're giving me the choice based on the contracts being somewhat similar, their ages are still very similar. Bregman doesn't have to move positions. He's still a third baseman. The only thing that concerns me about Bregman, and I got to do more research about this, is how many home runs will Alex Bregman lose without the Crawford boxes? Like, if you put him in Yankee Stadium or Citi Field, like, how many of those fly balls to left field that got out in Houston are just dying on the warning track in left field? I don't know. Got to think about that. But
we could look that up though real quick while you do the next thing. I'll go look that up.
Try to figure that one out for me. But yeah, I would prefer not going after Carlos Correa. A guy to keep an eye on who I think is probably not available only based on the way the Angels have started their offseason is Taylor Ward. Taylor Ward is 31 years old. At least he'll be 31 in a couple of weeks. The Angels still have control over him for the next 2 seasons. He's coming off a very solid year last year, 750 OPS, 25 home runs, can play the outfield, obviously, mostly a left fielder. Has also played a little bit of third base, a little bit. I mean, mostly earlier in his major league career when he first came up with the Angels, so I'm not sure how viable he would be. But Taylor Ward has proven over the last couple of years to be a rather solid offensive option in the outfield. Hit 23 home runs 2 years ago with an 833 OPS. I'm going to assume the Angels are not really making him available considering they've been pretty active so far. They've actually been one of the rare active teams, I guess, outside of the Dodgers signing Blake Snell in free agency. So I doubt he'll be available. The guy who I am intrigued by, and if you get him, he's your DH because that's pretty much all he does. He's 30 years old. He's under team control for 3 more years. And we're talking about one of the breakout stars of last year, Brent Rooker. Brent Rooker at 39 home runs last year, had a 927 OPS. He had 30 home runs a year earlier with Oakland. Not quite the same year he had this year. He does strike out a lot, but I'm starting to think, hey, that's a guy who you can pencil down for 35 home runs a year. He doesn't make a lot of money. I'm curious if he can play a little bit of outfield. Like last year, he literally only played 14 games in the outfield. Is he that much of a butcher out there? Or are the Oakland A's saying, hey, let's keep this guy at DH, let him put up massive numbers, and then we're going to trade his ass because we have no future as a franchise? I'd be very intrigued by Brent Rooker. Am I giving up top prospects for him? Probably not. And that's probably what it's going to cost if you're Oakland, because you could just go into the season with Rooker out there, let him hit a bunch of home runs in that minor league ballpark, and then find a team desperate enough to go trade for him. But Brent Rooker, not a bad option. And think about all the nicknames you could come up with, because his last name rhymes with,
Hooker.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. By the way, I do love Brent Rooker. That's a guy that I'm going to just breaking news for you. This is the first time I'm saying it, Evan. This affects you. I'm keeping Brent Rooker in our fantasy baseball league.
Are you really? Oh, you had him on your team last year?
I drafted him in the 20th round.
Oh, that's a no-brainer, man.
I know. So I would be all in on bringing in Brent Rooker. He just had something about him. He's got pop. He was on a bad team. He still was productive. I don't know his defense. I don't know how good that is, but when he can hit like that, who cares?
I mean, he never played the outfield. I just want to know if he's an option. Like, I don't love the idea of a 30-year-old having to be the DH all the time. J.D. Martinez was a special situation. If I'm bringing a guy in and I'm giving up, I'm giving up value to get the guy, I don't know if I just want to pencil him in as my DH for the next 3 years. I'd love to see that he can play a little bit of outfield, just a little bit of outfield. So I don't know about that. My last trade name, I think this guy is, you know what? I will tell you, if they don't get Alonso, if they don't get Alex Bregman, if we're going to the backup plan at first base, this is actually one of those options that I'm not going to say I'd be excited about, but I think is sneakily one of the better options out there. And I'm talking about a guy who is 29 years old, so relatively young. He is under team control for 2 more years, 2025, 2026. This guy's won a Gold Glove at first base before. The guy I'm talking about is a former World Series champion. The guy I'm talking about is Nathaniel Lowe of the Texas Rangers. Nathaniel Lowe, first baseman, played 140 games last year, hit 265, very high on base, so he could draw a walk, 361 on base, 760 OPS, 16 home runs. So he's not replacing Pete Alonso's power, but very good defensive player. A year before that, actually put up almost identical numbers in 161 games. 262 average, 775 OPS, 17 home runs. The year before that, 2022, was actually his best season. He hit 302 with 27 home runs, 76 RBIs, and an 851 OPS. So I think if we're being honest, he's a 260, 270 hitter. He'll hit you 15 to 20 home runs, but he'll give you Gold Glove defense at first base, and he's a left-handed bat. It's Rico Brogan, basically. No, but in all seriousness, I don't know what the cost would be, but I like that. That's a solid option at first base because you're upgrading yourself defensively. It's not a hypothetical upgrade like anyone who emails me and says, sign Willie Adames. It's a defensive upgrade. How's it a defensive upgrade? The guy was graded horribly at shortstop. You're asking him to move a different position at third base. Who knows if he's any good at third base? And then you're asking another guy to move to first base and Mark Vientos. Call me crazy. I'm not in love with the backup plan being moving Vientos to first base. He actually got better defensively last year at third base. Obviously, if the right player comes along, you'll move him to first base. But the idea of getting yourself a former Gold Glove winning first baseman to play first base, it's a downgrade offensively. It's an upgrade defensively. It's a left-handed bat. Nathaniel Lowe, your thoughts?
So I'm looking at this, and if I'm correct, the last 2 years he led the league in assists at first base. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's kind of weird. How do you do that?
I don't know, but he did, and I mean, so clearly he's not just a guy who's going to defensively, like he's not just like Anthony Rizzo who's good with the glove. He can make throws too. That's a good thing because that was one of the Pete Alonso's. That's where he fell short a lot of times, was trying to make that throw to second base. and people will criticize him. So if you can defensively upgrade there, again, he's maybe a little bit lesser of a John Olerud as well. Like that's the type of guy I'm thinking of, a guy who's his contact isn't as much as Olerud, but offensively he's not terrible. So I'm not opposed to it.
What we have learned by going through all of these potential position players is that 98% of them are backup plans. In fact, they're all backup plans. I think Luis Robert Jr., Cedric Mullins, because they're center fielders and the Met plan at center field seems a little cloudy right now. Is it literally Tyrone Taylor, Jose Siri till one of the young guys becomes available? I wouldn't necessarily frame them as backup plans, but third basemans, first basemans, yeah, they're if things don't work out with our number one option. So those are some of the position players. If there are ones that you want to suggest for the Rico Bronya You Create Trades podcast, you can email us to ricob@gmail.com. Coming up, we will do pitching. And I can give you this preview, this tiny itsy-bitsy preview. The pitching, a lot more appealing than the position players. The options when it comes to pitching targets, both in the bullpen and in the rotation, they are not backup plans. Very, very different. We'll do that coming up in a few days here on Rico Bronya. Again, any trade idea, we are going to have a Rico in which we react to your trade ideas. Nothing's off limits. I started this episode with Nick Castellanos, and we know that isn't happening. So email the pod, thericob@gmail.com, thericob@gmail.com, as we kick off trade week here on Rico Bronya. Position players, pitchers, your emails, and even a fictitious Met-Yankee episode. All coming up this week. Of course, if there's any breaking news, we will pop in and give you an instant reaction, Rico Bronya, as well. Remember to rate and subscribe, Rico, and take a listen throughout this long, arduous offseason. Thank you very much for listening, downloading, and subscribing to another edition of Rico Bronya.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Rico Bronya podcast. It's amazing, isn't it? Make sure you download it now to keep it on you at all times.